Man, that still hurts watching that crash. And I'm still living with the scarring and bruising from it even a couple weeks later. But before we get into the video and before we get back to that crash at the very end, I wanted to give you a little context into our Whistler trip. So I actually filmed the entire trip up to Whistler, which is one of my favorite parts of going to Whistler for a weekend. I love road trips, and the drive from the Seattle area up to Whistler is pretty amazing. There's really cool places to stop, and if the weather's nice, it's absolutely beautiful. So my friend Eric and I drove up with our wives, and we were meeting our friends Jake and Sarah up there. So it was a couple's weekend, and we rented an Airbnb in Creekside. Creekside is a little bit more affordable, so we were actually able to get an entire house with a 2-car garage and a hot tub, and each of us have our own rooms. And Eric, Tony, and my wife Liz, we drove up together. We left early Friday morning, and we got to Bellingham around lunchtime, so we were able to stop at Aslan Brewing for lunch, which was absolutely incredible. I highly recommend it. If you only get one place to stop at when you're making your way through, that's worth checking out. And only a mile and a half from there is the Transition Bike Shop. So naturally, since we're on a weekend bike trip, we had to stop at a bike shop. And it's not just any bike shop, it's the Transition Factory Shop, where they have a showroom. And we went, checked out all the bikes. Of course, we were curious if they had any good sales on too. And we chatted with the guys that were working there. They're really cool people, really knowledgeable, of course, and they go up to Whistler all the time too. So it was really fun to just hang out there and chat with them. If you're staying for a little bit, they'll even pour you a beer. We passed on that since we just had lunch and we were about to get on the road. But after we left Bellingham, crossed into Canada, and then we went straight to Vancouver. Now, Vancouver is an incredible city, lots of good food, great coffee, and tons of good shopping. So that's what we did. We ate and we shopped, and there's a bunch of stores that my wife loves to stop at, and there's a few of my favorite stores that are right there in Vancouver, and plenty of really good places to eat. So we shopped, had dinner, and then we made our way up to Whistler pretty late. We got to our Airbnb around 10 o'clock, settled in, got ready for the next day. Our friends Jake and Sarah made it there about midnight. So shortly after that, we went to bed and got up early so that we could get to the bike park. And that's where we're going to pick things up. Hope you enjoy it. Good morning from Whistler. Technically, good morning from Creekside. We are on our way to Whistler Village. And guess who made it? Jake made it.
I made it.
Got in somewhere around midnight, and we went to bed somewhere after that. Depends on who you talk to, especially Eric, who might be going on just an hour's sleep. But it's Whismas for us. It's the first and only day of the year that we are getting to the Whistler Bike Park. We are on our way. We're gonna get breakfast. We're gonna pick up our bikes. We're gonna pick up our lift tickets and get on the trails. The weather held out. It's supposed to be about mid-70s and no rain, maybe a little cloudy, maybe a little sun. Tomorrow might get some rain, but it's absolutely perfect. The last time we came, it downpoured the entire time that we were here. So anything without rain is good for us. All right, I didn't show you all the boring stuff, but the gist of it is a lot of lines. We all three rented from different places and had a mixture of how we got our tickets, but we're all back together. We've got Eric on a DaVinci Wilson. Jake's got a GT Fury Garbo, and I've got a Rocky Mountain Maiden, all from different Whistler rental spots. So pretty sweet bikes, high-end components, and pretty well taken care of, but also pretty well abused over the season. But now more lines, pretty busy here. Check it out. Let me talk you through some of this. So our first trail, Unamas, when you take the gondola up, it's one of the first options, and it was our very first trail down, so it's a really good one to warm up. It's a blue square and pretty straightforward. I apologize for my water bottle strap cutting in front of the camera throughout this whole ride. I do fix it later, so I apologize for at least this trail, but I promise it does get better. At some point when you get near the bottom, there's this pretty cool feature, and I can't remember which trail it's actually a part of, but we were able to stop and actually watch some people ride on and ride off, and one guy actually got stuck on top. He got on and he didn't ride off, and so he kept having to take attempts to get off.
I don't think my lack of front brake is ready for a Black Diamond, but we'll see.
That's the best way to do Black Diamond.
Yeah.
So it's not recommended that for your first trail down you hop on a Black Diamond, but we did it anyway. And every jump is just like that, where I don't even come close to clearing it. I surprisingly did okay on a few though. I skipped the bridge jump because I couldn't remember what the drop was like, and I'd already gone around it, so I just kept going. I figured I'd come back to it at some point. But generally I was really happy because I tried this once last year and I just rolled everything, like completely rolled, didn't get any air, and I was just happy with how much progress I had made in a year, that even fresh and new I was actually making an attempt at getting some decent air and distance on some of these jumps. I was constantly brake checking at everything that I just couldn't see, which is most of the trail. So every time I couldn't see what was on the other side, or I just didn't trust, I was coming to a stop, or I was just slowing down way too much. So typical first run for me, where I'm being really cautious. And I was looking forward to coming back and trying it again, but I never got around to it because I was saving it for day 2, and that clip you saw at the very beginning of the video, that was early on day 2. So I never got around to trying this a second time. I also started to notice some issues with my bike on this first run. The fork was not responding the way I would expect it to, and it was actually making some noise, like a squeaking noise, when it would fully compress. And I ended up taking it back to the rental place once I got down to the bottom and asking them to take a look. I actually ended up getting a flat right before the bottom. The rear tire was bald, and I was having some issues with the brakes. So there were a number of things, and I ended up taking it back, and they kept it and gave me a backup bike, which you'll see in a moment. But I was really struggling on this first run with a few different things, and I normally wouldn't complain about it, but it was at least affecting me mentally. So I was really relieved when they gave me a new bike, although I kind of treated the first run on the new bike like the first run. So this was Beeline, and we had never hit Beeline before because last time we came to Whistler it was actually closed the whole trip. So it was pretty cool to check out, and it's very similar to Crank It Up or Seymour, where it's pretty flowy, pretty mild, it's not too hard, it has some jumps, and it was generally pretty fun. I'd say the trails up at the top in the Garbanzo zone weren't in the best shape, but lower on the mountain, they were actually in pretty awesome shape because it had rained a few times throughout the summer, and I've heard that they just kept building and building. This trail at Devil's Club was another new trail for us, a little bit of a technical trail. I got to learn a few things about how my GoPro responds. This is the Hero 7 Black mounted on the original chest strap that GoPro created.
I clipped 2 trees.
And the extra shakiness that you're seeing is from 2 different things. One, the chest plate actually moving, the whole plate moving. So the camera can't help with the stabilization if the whole thing is bouncing up and down. And then the stabilization actually is not very good in low light conditions. You'll see that more in later clips where the forest is really dense and dark, and that low light makes the stabilization not work very well. We got to the bottom of this trail and my friend Jake was behind me, and we didn't know what it was like, so when we got on it, I was actually a little worried if he would actually make it or if he would turn around, if he would just walk down. And a couple minutes later, he emerged from the woods on his bike, and we were super excited for him. It's definitely probably the hardest trail that he'd hit, so that was really cool. So Crankworx was not too long ago, and it was really cool to see Emil Johansson there because he obviously won Red Bull Joyride, and he had a really cool story. If you hadn't seen it, just look up Emil's comeback story. And we kept on pace with him. We weren't doing the same trails, but we just ended up down in the lift line at the same time to him and his crew pretty much the whole day. Crank It Up is actually one of our more favorite, simple, easy trails, and this was the first trail on the new bike that I was mentioning. They gave me a Rocky Mountain Slayer as opposed to the Rocky Mountain Maiden downhill specific bike that I was riding. So this is more of the all mountain, not so much downhill specific bike. I think it's 170 travel front and rear, and it was actually a pretty awesome bike. I really loved this. It was also in great shape. It looked like it had hardly been used, and it's very possible that it hadn't really been used. I actually don't think they allow this bike for rent in the bike park. I believe it's a rental that's used outside of the bike park on all the surrounding trails, but because they didn't have any other extra large bikes, this is what they ended up giving me, and I was really, really sad to see it go. Later, they made me give it back, and I would have loved to have just stayed on this bike because it was awesome. But it did make me realize that I should definitely give my bike a try here at Whistler. I know it'll take a toll on it, and I'll have some work to do, but I want to give it a try. This kid was flying on the trail, and he was definitely on the edge of his abilities, and at one point he just goes somersaulting off into the bushes, but it was a really soft landing, and he sprang back up, and he was actually right behind me. This part of the trail is so funny because you can really come into it with a lot of speed, but there's also a ton of ruts from people slowing down and bunching up in groups, because up ahead here there's this big turn on a wood feature that you really have to slow down for. Like, you have to go to like a crawling pace, and we all did it, everyone does it, but it is so rough in the last few hundred yards leading up to it. It was also one of the few times I was able to catch up to Eric, because Eric is so fast. He rides so much more fearlessly than I do, so he's almost always way in front of me, but I was able to catch up, which was nice. Right here, the trail splits from Crank It Up to Seymour, and we did Crank It Up, but then we tried Seymour because it was also closed the last time we were here, and we ended up loving Seymour. It was way more fun than the lower part of Crank It Up, so every time we rode Crank It Up, we just kept hitting Seymour for the last half of it. And at this point on the bike, my confidence was actually pretty high. I was really enjoying it and having fun and able to ride really confidently and hit the jumps a lot more confidently. I don't know what exactly it was. Obviously, I was having issues with my other bike, but I don't know if it's the geometry of this bike or the size, weight, what exactly, but it was a lot of fun to be hitting these trails on this bike, and I'm actually really excited to not try a downhill bike next time I go. Another fun thing and also humbling thing is all the kids on the trails, and most of them are riding way better than I am.
What's up, little man?
I definitely hope that's me when the time comes. This dad and his little kid cruising down Seymour at Whistler. I hope that's a brief look into my future. So the moment that I had been looking forward to the most, A-Line. Especially on this bike that my confidence was feeling pretty good. Now, this was also my first time down A-Line since last year when I was barely hitting anything. So it's not like I have a ton of confidence in the trail itself, but definitely gave it my best and did way better than I expected, which was really cool. I actually cleared a lot of the jumps in my first run down, and then we did it one or two more times, and it just kind of kept getting better each time. So that was probably the highlight of the whole trip for me, was just doing way better than I thought. I don't know exactly what happened to that guy. He seemed to be in a good bit of pain. He came flying past us, and he was just walking it off when we passed. He seemed fine, but it definitely seemed like a hard crash. So when I did A-Line last year, I actually only had the courage to do part of it, and this was my very first time actually doing the whole trail from top to bottom, which was another really exciting part outside of just doing fairly well on it. I didn't clear every jump, and I didn't, do any big whips or tricks on any of the jumps, but it's the best that I had ever done, and that's all I could ask for. And it was actually better than I thought I would do, which is also all I could ask for. So right here, I actually jumped in front of Emil's crew because I was worried that they were going to kind of take up the whole trail, and I didn't want to be caught going down with them. So I was like, hey, they seem to be hanging out, so let's just go. And I went in front of Eric and I just went for it. But this was my first time on this part of the trail. I'd never seen this before. So right here, so there's actually a fork that I had to stop at, and they all came flying by. Turns out they were right behind us. So good thing we got off the trail as quick as we did. You can kind of see though that all the rain meant that they were able to do some building and maintenance on this trail, and it was actually in pretty good shape. Definitely some braking bumps here and there, but it was in solid shape. Again, this lower part of A-Line is all part of the trail that I did not do last year, so it was brand new to me. And I'd always heard that there's this, technical stretch of it, and I'd seen video of it, but it was pretty cool to actually get on it, and it always seemed so narrow, but it was actually pretty manageable. And the couple times that I did it this weekend, I did just fine on it, was able to keep some decent speed, not that fast or anything. But it was actually a pretty cool section, and we ended up taking Jake on it, our friend who hadn't really hit some of the hard trails before. We said, oh, you should be able to do this, and I reluctantly agreed with Eric that, yeah, you could give it a try. And he did it, very slowly, very carefully, but he did it. And this step up, the trick with this step up is just as much speed as you possibly can, but it's so big looking. I just was constantly brake checking, and I never gave it my full all. I think that was actually the best I had done, and I landed on the lip of the landing pretty bad. The Blue Velvet's another one of those fairly decent starter trails at the top when you take the gondola from Whistler Village up. And since we had done Una Moss, we wanted to give this one a try. Eric actually loved this trail, but I hated the trail. I was back on the Rocky Mountain Maiden, the downhill bike, and the bike just didn't seem any better. I was still struggling with it, and pair that with this trail that was just not in the best shape, I was not having a great time. Speaking of not having a great time, first time on Ninja Cougar, and the GoPro is having about as good of a time as I am. Again, this is one of those low light conditions where the stabilizer is not working very well. Plus, it was super rocky and rooty, so the chest plate was actually bouncing up and down. So I apologize, but also wanted you actually to see what the experience was. I ended up just suffering through this trail. And it only gets worse. couldn't keep my speed consistent, was struggling through turns, and things like this happened quite a bit. So after that, we actually attempted a double black, and Eric actually did it, but I fell too many times in just the first stretch of it that I said forget it, and I hiked off the trail and went to a different one, a Black Diamond, the one you're seeing here, Afternoon Delight. And it was still every bit as challenging. Had fun with the challenge. I had to step off a number of times to survive, like right here. Partly just a ton of loose dirt, having never seen the trail before. Issues with the bike, so my mind wasn't in it. The list goes on. But despite all that, you still have incredible views. You're in the mountains on a bike, so all the problems that I had mentioned never really got me down or bothered me. I was having an absolute blast and couldn't really ever see having a bad time in Whistler. Okay, so we're back on Una Mas. This is the second day of our trip. This is Sunday, and this is my last run of our trip because remember that clip at the very beginning? Yep, that happens just a few seconds from now. And the unfortunate thing is I wasn't doing something really cool or pushing the limits or anything crazy. I was just on a very normal, very safe section. And right in this turn, I turned around to look at someone behind me and also pull off, and that's where it all went wrong.
All right? I think so.
Everything's still there? Just take a second.
I think so. Oh. Man, that's never happened before.
It's alright? Yeah, I think he's alright. Alright, Frank. You alright, man?
I think so, yeah.
Take your time.
Yeah.
You alright there?
Yeah, good, man. Thank you.
Alright, thank you.
Yeah, just a little.
Bloody knuckle.
Yeah, just a little stunner. Thanks for stopping.
Oh yeah, of course, dude.
I got it. Hey, thanks, man.
No problem. Dude, you made it a ways.
Yeah, it's surprising. It's surprising.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks, man.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So did you run out of it?
Oh, I just
Just kept rolling. Kept rolling.
I don't know. I'm an idiot.
No, dude. I think everybody's blown out a corner at least once.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's just a bad spot. Definitely know I have.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a run down here.
Okay.
Thanks for stopping.
Yeah, dude.
And that was a wrap on my Whistler Bike Park experience for the weekend. But despite the pain that I was in and how much I was bleeding, I really wasn't discouraged because there's still so much to do in Whistler. So I cleaned off my bike, got it back to the rental shop, got back to our Airbnb and cleaned myself off, and spent the rest of the time walking around with my wife and friends and eating and shopping and just enjoying everything else there is about Whistler. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out my other videos.